In 1889, a man collapsed on a street in Turin, Italy. He had just thrown his arms around a horse being whipped by its owner, sobbing uncontrollably. He would never write another word again. He would spend the last 11 years of his life in silence, cared for by his mother and sister, his mind gone. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche. And yet, this broken man left behind one of the most dangerous, most misunderstood, and most liberating ideas in the history of philosophy, an idea about what it actually means to become a full human being. He called it der Ubermensch, the Overman, the beyond man, the one who goes past what humanity currently is. This is not a story about supermen or superheroes. It's a story about the death of God, the collapse of old truths, and one philosopher's answer to a question that still haunts us today. If nothing is true anymore, who do you become? To understand the Ubermensch, you first have to understand the man who imagined him, because Nietzsche's philosophy was never abstract. It was carved out of his own suffering. Born in 1844 in a small Prussian town, Nietzsche was a prodigy. By 24, he was a full professor of classical philology at the University of Basel, one of the youngest in European history. He was brilliant, sickly, and desperately lonely. Migraines that lasted days, near blindness, a stomach that rejected most food. Nietzsche spent much of his adult life in physical agony, moving from city to city across Europe, searching for a climate his body could tolerate. And yet, out of this fragile body came some of the most forceful writing in Western thought. Nietzsche didn't philosophize despite his suffering. He philosophized through it. He believed that pain, properly faced, doesn't just break you, it can forge you. This idea that difficulty is not the enemy of greatness, but the raw material of it, is the seed of everything that follows. In 1882, Nietzsche wrote a passage that would echo for the next 150 years. In The Gay Science, a madman runs into a marketplace with a lantern in broad daylight, screaming, "God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him." Nietzsche wasn't celebrating atheism. He wasn't making a triumphant announcement. He was issuing a warning. For nearly 2,000 years, Western civilization had built its entire sense of meaning, morality, and purpose on a religious foundation: good and evil, heaven and hell, purpose after death. But science, reason, and modernity had quietly hollowed that foundation out, and most people, Nietzsche said, hadn't even noticed the building was already collapsing. This is what he called nihilism, the terrifying realization that the old values no longer hold weight, and nothing has yet arrived to replace them. Nietzsche saw two possible futures for humanity in the wake of this collapse. The first, people cling to comfort, conformity, and mediocrity, sedating themselves with entertainment and shallow pleasure. He gave this figure a name, der letzte Mensch, the last man. Content, passionless, safe, small. The second future is the one this video is about. Someone has to create new values from the wreckage. Someone has to stand in the ruins of the old world and build, rather than mourn. That someone is the Ubermensch. Nietzsche introduced the Ubermensch in his most poetic and strange work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Published in 1883, it's part philosophy, part prophecy, part fever dream. Here's the crucial thing most people get wrong. The Ubermensch is not a superhero. It's not about physical strength, domination, or ruling over others. That's a Nazi-era distortion we'll get to shortly. The Ubermensch is better understood as a process, not a person. It is what a human being becomes when they stop outsourcing their values to religion, tradition, or the crowd, and instead take full responsibility for creating their own meaning. Nietzsche gives us a famous image to explain this transformation. The
Stage
three
1.
metamorphoses
The camel.
of the spirit. This is most of us, for most of our lives. The camel kneels down and asks to be loaded with burdens, duty, obedience, tradition, thou shalt. It carries what it's told to carry, and it takes pride in how much weight it can bear. This is the obedient self. Stage 2. The lion. At some point, the camel wanders into the desert and confronts a great dragon named Thou Shalt. Every inherited value, every external rule. The lion's task is not to create anything new. Its task is to say, I will. To seize freedom by force. To destroy the illusion that these old values are sacred and unquestionable. The lion clears the ground. It is pure, defiant, no. Stage 3. The child. And here is the part almost everyone misses. The final stage is not the lion. Destruction alone isn't the goal. The spirit must become a child. Innocence. Forgetting. A new beginning. A wheel rolling out of its own center. The child says yes, not out of obedience, but out of pure creative will. The child plays. The child creates values because it wants to, not because it's told to. The Ubermensch is the child, someone who has passed through obedience, through rebellion, and arrived at self-authored creation. Someone who can look at a universe with no built-in meaning and say, I will build meaning anyway, and I will build it myself. Underneath the Ubermensch sits another Nietzschean concept, often the most misused of all, the will to power. This is not about political domination or crushing your enemies, though the Nazis later twisted it into exactly that. For Nietzsche, the will to power is something closer to a fundamental life force, the drive within all living things to grow, to expand, to overcome resistance, to become more than they currently are. A river doesn't carve a canyon by being passive. An artist doesn't create a masterpiece by avoiding difficulty. Growth requires resistance. Nietzsche believed that a life well lived is one spent overcoming your fears, your laziness, your inherited beliefs, your comfortable smallness. The Ubermensch, then, is someone who has turned the will to power inward, not toward dominating others, but toward mastering and creating themselves. Nietzsche gives us one final, brutal thought experiment to test whether we're truly living as an Ubermensch, or still hiding as the last man. Imagine a demon appears to you in your loneliest moment and says, this exact life you are living now, every joy, every humiliation, every small and great thing, you will have to live again and again, countless times, in the exact same sequence, forever. Would you fall to the ground and curse this demon? Or would you say, never have I heard anything more divine? This is the eternal recurrence, not necessarily a literal cosmology, but a personal test. Nietzsche asks, are you living a life you would be willing to relive infinitely? If not, what needs to change? Not tomorrow, not in some imagined afterlife, but right now, in this one life you actually have? This is why Nietzsche's most famous phrase, borrowed from the Roman poet Horace, matters so much. Amor fati, love of fate. Not merely enduring your life, but loving it, including its wounds, so completely that you would choose it again. No discussion of the Ubermensch is honest without confronting how badly this idea was abused. After Nietzsche's mental collapse, his sister Elizabeth Förster Nietzsche took control of his unpublished writings. She was a nationalist and anti-Semite who edited and distorted his work to align with fascist ideology. Decades before the Nazi Party used a cherry-picked, mutilated version of the Ubermensch and the will to power to justify racial supremacy. This would have horrified Nietzsche. He explicitly despised German nationalism and anti-Semitism in his actual writings and mocked the herd mentality of blind nationalism. The Ubermensch was never about one race ruling another. It was about any individual transcending inherited dogma through self-creation. Understanding this history isn't a footnote. It's essential, because it shows exactly what happens when a philosophy of individual self-overcoming gets twisted into a philosophy of collective domination. So strip away the myth, the mustache, the misuse. What does Nietzsche's Ubermensch actually ask of us, sitting here in the 21st century? It asks, are you a camel, carrying beliefs you never chose? Are you a lion, still stuck in rebellion, defined only by what you're against? Or are you willing to become the child, to take responsibility for building your own values, your own meaning, your own standard of greatness? It asks you to stop waiting for permission, to stop outsourcing your sense of purpose to a job title, an algorithm, a crowd's approval, to treat your own life as a work of art you are personally responsible for sculpting. Flaws, never gave us a checklist at all. That was the point. The Ubermensch isn't a destination you arrive at once. It's a posture, a constant, difficult, honest process of self-overcoming. Friedrich Nietzsche died in 1900, largely unknown to the wider public. His mind lost a decade earlier on that street in Turin. He never saw the influence his ideas would have on psychology, art, literature, and the way millions of people would come to think about freedom and meaning. He once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Maybe that's the real blueprint. Not a Superman, not domination, just the quiet, difficult courage to ask yourself one honest question. What values are you living by? And did you actually choose them?